Jim Bridger, Part 6.
From 1862 until 1869 or 1870, Bridger remained on the plains in the capacity of guide and scout for various government expeditions sent against hostile Indians, and in locating the most feasible routes between the different military posts already or about to be established in the Indian country. After the government in 1868 had abandoned the forts along the Bozeman Trail, which Colonel Carrington had built and maintained through most trying times, Bridger was transferred from these posts to Fort Laramie, where he was a familiar figure for many years. Honorable John Hunton, an old-time resident of Fort Laramie, yet living there in his 85th year, has given to the authors of this work much information about Jim Bridger, as the two were very intimately acquainted. In his correspondence, he says, "I became acquainted with Jim Bridger about the middle of October 1868, when he was transferred to Fort Laramie, having been given a layoff to recuperate his enfeebled condition. Seth E. Ward was the post sutler here at that time, and Colonel W.G. Bullock was his general manager. I was one of the 6 employees. 3 of us employees, John Boyd, Hopkins Clark, and myself, occupied the bunk room in the sutler store building, and Bridger was given a bunk in the same room. Here he remained, occupying the room with us most of the time until about the middle of April 1868. He made 2 or 3 trips to Cheyenne and Fort D.A. Russell during the time he was here, but I do not think he was absent at any time to exceed 10 days. He seemed to prefer to be around here and to be alone, or with some 1 or 2 persons who did not annoy him by constant questioning. Sometimes he seemed to like to talk, and always made a good listener when the subject of conversation interested or pleased him. When it did not, he always curled his upper lip with a sneer and left the audience. He told me many times he did not like to sacrifice his feelings, intelligence, or personal pleasure when it was such an easy matter to walk away from a damn fool talking. I have more than once seen him walk away from a group of Army officers in the officers' club room, where he was always a welcome guest, because some officer would comment on something or somebody when Bridger would think the comment was made in ignorance or malice. From an educational standpoint, he was ignorant, not knowing how to either read or write. He told me he was born in Virginia and that his parents removed to Carondelet, Missouri, when he was about 4 years of age. He said his mother's name before marriage was Tyler, of the President Tyler family, that he left home and came to the Rocky Mountains when a boy, that he first went up the Missouri River to the mountains and then back to where Independence now is, and then west again to the mountains. He said he was first at Fort Laramie in his teens, but did not know or remember the exact year, that he spent the winter that old man Laramie was killed down at the fort and around here, and was one of the party who went out to search for Laramie when he did not come back in the spring as he said he would. That the party went up the Laramie Valley searching it and all its tributaries, that they found an unfinished cottonwood log cabin on the north side of the river below the mouth of Sabile Creek, and one broken beaver trap near it, but no Laramie. He said that he learned some 2 years later from the Arapaho Indians that some of the tribe had killed Laramie and put his body under the ice in a beaver dam, that he believed he had traveled more over the Rocky Mountain region than any other white man except one, whose name I do not remember, but it was not Kit Carson. He had great respect for Carson and some of the other prominent mountaineers, but for others, General Fremont among them, the utmost contempt. He had many traducers among the would-be great trappers, guides, and scouts, but none who ever thought it prudent to court a personal verification of their accusations or insinuations. His home was near Independence, Missouri. He had an Indian family, and one of his sons lived in Cheyenne in 1868 or 1869. He was sent by the government from here to Fort Fetterman in the spring of 1868 to conduct the large number of freight trains then being used for the transportation of the supplies from the abandoned posts of Phil Kearny, C.F. Smith, and Reno from that place through the mountains to Medicine Bow Station and Fort Fred Steele on the Platte. After that job, he quit the government service. I saw him in Cheyenne about the latter part of August 1868 for the last time, and then for only a few minutes. He was at the time in rather feeble health. Previous to his death in Denver in the summer of 1917, A.J. Shotwell, who was also a personal friend of Jim Bridger, gave in correspondence to the authors of this work much valuable and interesting information about the famous mountaineer and plainsman. Mr. Shotwell became acquainted with Bridger under somewhat peculiar circumstances. He had long been an ardent admirer of the frontiersman, and in 1865 Shotwell was a member of the 11th Ohio Cavalry and was stationed at Fort Laramie. There he became a part of General Connor's expedition through the Sioux country almost as far north as the Yellowstone. Jim Bridger was the chief guide on this occasion, and Shotwell had hopes of becoming acquainted with him sometime while the expedition was out. But during all that time, so prone was Bridger to hold himself aloof that there were but few chances for anyone to have any conversation with him. "We were out on this expedition 2 months," writes Shotwell, traveling during that time nearly 800 miles, and every night Jim Bridger made his camp alone beside our own so as to be near the scout who was attached to our mess. He would cook his frugal meal, and as soon as darkness approached, wrap himself in his blanket for the night. But with the first peep of day, he was astir, and after a hasty cup of coffee and some jerked meat, he'd saddle up, and after calling on General Connor, quietly ride away again, and we would see no more of him until evening, when he would ride into camp and after a short conference with the general, find his accustomed place for the night again. And so each day was a repetition of the day before. By the last of August, we had arrived in the Bighorn Mountain country, and one evening we were making camp. The wagon train of 90 wagons had just formed their circular corral, and the various messes had started campfires when one of the scouts came in reporting a large Indian camp which he judged to be 40 miles distant. Soon Bridger was all animation, and after a hasty consultation, 250 men having good mounts were in the saddle, and with General Connor at the head, set off on a night's ride to reach the band of warriors before break of day. I was one of this party and will never forget how we rode through the silent watches of the night with naught to light our way except the brilliant stars and a cloudless sky, and how that long column of silent men wound through rocky defiles and over stretches of grassy plains until the way seemed interminable, but all confident in our guide. When the first rays of light heralded the coming of day, we suddenly halted, and there right before us lay the object of our search. In less time than it takes to tell it, the column of mounted men had formed a crescent and were charging pell-mell into we knew not what. If ever a band of Indians were taken by surprise, it was there and then, and all the credit was due to the quiet man who had conducted us safely to our goal. During all that engagement, Bridger seemed to be always in the right place at the opportune time. Soon after the return to Fort Laramie, Shotwell's command received news that the 11th Ohio would be relieved by troops of the regular army and would soon all be home again in the east. Shotwell continues his correspondence as follows. On the morning of our starting, what was my surprise to find Jim Bridger a passenger in the same mail ambulance that would carry us over the first stage of our journey to Julesburg, 180 miles distance, where we expected to secure passage to the Missouri River on the overland stagecoach. We had put our belongings in the mail wagon when Bridger came up and throwing a bundle aboard asked, "Where are you boys going?" When told through to the river, he frowned for a moment and then said, "So am I, and if we travel together, I guess it's best to be sociable." And here came another surprise. The man who in all the previous years was so unapproachable soon became one of the most companionable men I have ever met, and most entertainingly related incidents in a rich life and experience. Our journey to Julesburg consumed 2 days and a night and was fraught with much discomfort owing to our crowded quarters among the mail sacks and other baggage loaded inside to limit space of an army ambulance. At Julesburg, we were told that no passage could be had on the overland eastbound stage short of 10 days, as all space was engaged that far ahead. This information was discomforting, but relief appeared in the shape of a train of 25 wagons returning empty from Denver, bound for the Missouri River via Fort Kearny, Nebraska. We quickly made terms with the wagon master to carry us to Fort Kearny, 200 miles on our way, from which place 3 different stage lines ran to as many points on the river. We were assigned a wagon having a large, deep body with double canvas cover, and buying a lot of hay, we cushioned the floor of our wagon to the depth of about 6 inches, piled in our blankets and other belongings, and got aboard, and for 8 days traveled in perfect comfort. That was indeed a memorable journey. There were many roadhouses along the overland trail at that time, and knowing it was the custom of freighters to camp near such places, we depended on securing meals at these houses, sleeping in our wagon at night. Our plan of travel met with a surprise the first night out, a surprise most agreeable, however. Our wagon train had halted for the night about 100 yards from one of these caravanserais, and we and our little party had no sooner lighted and were stretching our limbs than we observed a man approaching from the house, and as he drew near he exclaimed, "Of all men, whom have we here but old Jim Bridger?" After further exclamations and handshakings, he continued by saying, "Come right in, Jim. The place is yours as long as you care to stay." Bridger replied, "Here are 2 soldier boys traveling with me. I stay with them." But the man said, "It's all the same, Bridger and his friends included." So we all walked in and soon were seated to a most bountiful meal of the best the place afforded, and places to sleep were provided, and a good breakfast followed with a lunch for the noon hour, when we took leave and not a penny to pay.
End of Part 6.